If you've watched any Formula 1 this season, then you know that McLaren are blessed with two incredibly competitive drivers. Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri have looked like two of the best on the grid this season and have been using the incredibly competitive MCL38 to great effect. They're second and fourth in the Drivers' Championship. Over the last 5 races, they've picked up 7 podiums between them. They're on course to win the Constructors' Championship, and Lando Norris still has a slim hope of winning the Drivers' Championship. In theory, they are in the perfect position. Having two very fast drivers in a very fast car means you win more races, you claim more points, and in theory you win more titles, which is all great. But while Formula 1 is a team sport, it also isn't. Time and again, we have seen top teams with incredibly competitive cars and two fantastic drivers struggle to make it work, and McLaren are in that exact same situation. I'm George, this is F1 Reverse. You're watching Don't At Me, the show where I get a chance to tell you what I really think about Formula 1. And today, that is how ecstatic I am that McLaren are making what you might call a mess of their team orders. So don't go anywhere. So I want to start this off by taking a quick look at where McLaren currently are. They're 8 points behind Red Bull in the Constructors' Championship, and considering that Red Bull look like the 4th fastest team at the moment, they're favourites to win that championship as well. Ferrari are only 31 points behind McLaren at the moment, but I think McLaren should be able to hold on to that lead over the next 8 races, though it might be a little too close to get comfortable just yet. In the Drivers' Championship, Lando Norris is 62 points behind Max Verstappen, and Oscar Piastri is another 48 points behind his teammate. It's pretty simple maths to see that Lando is the likeliest of the two to beat Max. In terms of relative performance between the teams, McLaren appear to have the fastest car, but it's so close between them and Ferrari that it doesn't really matter. If either team manages to find a slight edge in performance thanks to setup, or maybe they get their strategy better than the other team, they can get the upper hand in a race and they will win, like we saw in Monza, where Ferrari's strategy gave them the upper hand. I don't buy into this narrative that I've been seeing quite often that McLaren are clearly the faster car at the moment. It's just far too close to be so definitive about it. When you compare the two McLaren drivers, Lando Norris has had the better season as a whole. That's why he leads the two of them in the Drivers' Championship. But he did get that big early season upgrade before Piastri, and over the past 5 races, they have scored exactly the same number of points. What is clear is that McLaren have two fantastic drivers who are both performing incredibly well at the moment. They're both fighting for podium finishes, and they'll probably carry on doing that for the remaining 8 races of the season. They look favourites to win the Constructors' Championship, and Lando Norris has a shot at winning the Drivers' Championship. Not a good one, but more on that later. If it was early in the season, or the Drivers' Championship wasn't going to be as close as it appears it might be, then they could just leave their drivers to race and we would all love the battle between them. The problem though is that that isn't the case. It's late in the season, they aren't leading the Drivers' Championship, and Lando Norris has a clear advantage over Oscar Piastri as they try to chase that title down. Just before I really dive further into this, I want to tell you about a project we've been working on for a few months now and that we're really excited about. We're launching F1Reverse.com. It's our merch store and potentially more in the future. We spent a lot of time coming up with designs that we thought looked clean, cool, and showed off our passion for Formula 1. Personally, I love the Driven by Passion design. I think it looks so sick, it's so perfectly Formula 1, and you'll be seeing me in a lot of this merch real soon. The quality of the gear is really good as well. We're shipping worldwide, so wherever you are, if you want to get your hands on some of this gear, check out F1Reverse.com today. There'll be a link down below in the description. It's the perfect way to help support us in bringing you daily F1 news. Right, back to McLaren. And why didn't they favour Lando at Monza? Considering the situation at the team, let's strip this question back to be, should McLaren be favouring Lando Norris, and if so, to what extent? Because it's far more complicated than just a yes or no answer. Let's take the last Grand Prix in Italy as an example for the different things that the team could be doing. So on this end of the scale, the bottom end, you've got the just leave them to race. That's kind of what happened at Monza. Oscar pulled off a brilliant move around the outside at turn 4, which gave him the lead of the race. From there, he drove away from Lando and eventually finished 4 seconds ahead of his teammate. In this scenario, even if Lando had caught up, McLaren wouldn't have asked Oscar to let him by. That's to just leave them to race end of the scale. The other end of the scale, the top end, is the Oscar Piastri is the sacrificial kangaroo at the altar of Lando Norris. So in this situation, McLaren tell Oscar before the start of the race that he's not to make a move on Lando at any point, and instead to just sit behind him like a good second driver, stopping anyone from putting any pressure on Lando whatsoever, probably backing up the rest of the field a little in the process, and essentially letting Lando play Tetris on his steering wheel screen while brainlessly driving 53 laps at Monza. Basically, Oscar plays defense so Lando can maximize his points. Then there is the middle ground. This is the we will intervene if Lando is clearly quicker, otherwise you're free to race. In this case, the two are told to not wreck each other, but otherwise they're pretty free to race unless it's clear that Lando is quicker and Oscar is holding him up. Then you make the swap and let Lando chase after the points without Oscar holding him up. In this situation, if Oscar can prove he's quicker than Lando, then he can keep the position. Otherwise, Lando gets a free pass on Oscar once he's caught up. Or if Oscar doesn't overtake him, then Lando just gets to hold on to the position based on pure merit. Basically, the faster driver gets to finish first, which is a pretty fair middle ground. It stops the two from ruining each other's races 10 laps from the end by defending or attacking too hard, and rewards the driver with the best performance. Stepping out of the theory and back into the reality, where did McLaren place themselves on this scale in Monza? Well, probably, from what we saw anyway, they were slap bang in the middle. The two were free to race at the start, that's clear because Oscar passed Lando with one of the best moves we've seen in recent seasons. Then, over the course of the race, Oscar proved to be the faster driver and kept hold of what ended up being second place. If Lando had caught him up, then McLaren may very well have asked Oscar to let him past, but Lando didn't. He actually lost ground to Oscar over the final stint. After both had pitted a second time, the gap was 2.359 seconds, and by the time they took the checkered flag, it was 3.489 seconds. So McLaren didn't make the call to switch the cars because, well, Oscar was quicker. Now, if you get your F1 coverage through certain English outlets, then you might think that McLaren had committed a war crime by not asking Oscar Piastri to crash into the other 18 cars on the grid, leaving Lando to take first place while no one else got a point. If you saw Will Buxton's rant about McLaren's team orders after the race, then you might think that Lando Norris is his son, and that McLaren and Oscar Piastri are some very mean bigger boys who have been bullying little Lando on the way to school. He was almost in tears, talking about how stupid McLaren were for not helping Lando win the race. But are they right? Well, if McLaren's only goal as a team is to keep Lando happy and get in the Drivers' Championship this year, then yes. He probably should have said to Oscar before the race, don't pass Lando, just help him win. Now, obviously that didn't happen, and the team have been very honest in saying that they told the two drivers they were free to race. That could be for a number of reasons. Andrea Stella said after the race that up until that point, so after Monza had finished, they didn't think the Drivers' Championship was really on. They thought that they did have an advantage over Red Bull at certain circuits, but potentially not at others, and that Max would probably gain some points back finishing ahead of Lando in some places. So up until now, the team weren't even sure that Lando could do it, which is fair enough. When journalists and F1 historians talk about F1's greatest championship comebacks, they point toward a season like 2012, for example, when Sebastian Vettel trailed Fernando Alonso by 39 points with 7 races left. If, and it is an effing huge if, but if Lando pulls off the championship win this season, it will be the greatest comeback in F1 history. He's got to find 63 points more than Verstappen over the next 8 races. That's a massive difference, and such a bigger gap than Vettel's 39 in 7 races. Because of how far away Lando is from Max, and how insanely improbable this championship challenge is, McLaren haven't wanted to start sacrificing Oscar. Let's say they start telling Oscar to give up places to Lando every race. And I mean, literally, Oscar, let Lando unlap himself so he can get ahead of you and finish in second instead of third. Not that that would ever happen, but let's say they went that far. They stop the two from fighting, completely, and they essentially relegate Piastri into the Bottas role. Then, Red Bull come back and they find some performance, and all of a sudden, the gap stops shrinking, and Max goes on to win the championship by the best part of 100 points. That's a really comfortable championship win. If that happens, then what have they done by relegating Oscar to the Bottas role for the rest of the season? Well, they've pissed Oscar off by making him their second driver. And they've pissed off Oscar's manager, Mark Webber, who had one of the most toxic teammate relationships in recent F1 history after getting made Sebastian Vettel's second driver. What you've done is you've alienated the most promising prospect in the sport, whose contract is up at the end of 2026. Oscar Piastri is not second driver quality. He's a championship-winning driver. And Red Bull or Mercedes or Ferrari will come in, offer him a big money contract, and promise to never make him a second driver ever again. He'll go elsewhere and make McLaren regret their mistake. People seem to completely forget that it's only Oscar's second season. He has started 38 races to Lando's 120, and he looks at least as fast as Lando, and he's only going to get better as well. It's easy to say right now that favouring Lando is the right thing to do. But there's more to McLaren than just this season. There is the future as well, and Oscar Piastri looks like a hell of a driver to have in your future. And that's exactly the problem. It's Oscar's impressive performance that has made this so hard for McLaren. It would be easy for McLaren to favour Lando if he was obviously faster, but he just isn't. And at Monza, the evidence is right there for you to see. The two are evenly matched, and that is the worst possible thing for McLaren and Lando right now. So yes, favouring Lando now, post Monza, looks like the right thing to do, but it hasn't always been the right thing to do. McLaren didn't know for sure that Red Bull were really as bad as they've looked. And even now, if they favour Lando, it's far more likely he doesn't win the Drivers' Championship than he passes Max to win it. That points gap is massive. It'll be utterly incredible and spectacular if he wins the title, but it is such a long shot. It's so easy for those in the media and those outside the team to look at the championship table now and say, well, why didn't they let Lando win in Hungary? Or why didn't they tell Oscar to not outdrive Lando in Monza? It isn't that simple though. This championship is far from guaranteed, even if they had favoured Lando all along, and pissing off Oscar would be a massive mistake for the team's future. If Lando had better first lap performance, if he was outdriving Oscar at every race, if winning the championship wouldn't require the greatest comeback in F1 history, then it would be easy. But that isn't the case. Unfortunately, despite everything I've just said, now is probably the time that they need to make the call and ask Oscar to help his teammate out. In Monza, Red Bull looked so off it, and if McLaren can help Lando, then they probably should help him win the title. It's still the longest of long shots, but he can do it. But they don't have to make that call because Lando needs protection from the Red Bull cars. They have to start doing it because Oscar is such a fast driver. It isn't like they can rely on Lando to win from a better qualifying position against his teammate due to his first lap performance being so terrible. Admittedly, Monza was an incredible move by Piastri rather than a Norris mistake, but that just highlights how hard it is to tell Oscar to not fight. Also, it isn't as simple as just telling Oscar to not fight Lando or to give positions to Lando whenever he can. Oscar wants to win races, he wants podium finishes, he wants to be the lead driver in that team. Every single driver in F1 wants to beat their teammate more than anyone else. It's a very difficult situation, and McLaren needs Oscar's agreement that helping Lando is the right thing to do. But Oscar's completely within his rights to say, no, I don't think that is what I want to do. Everything the team has said after Monza indicates that they are going to have these conversations. Andrea Stella has said that they do now think Lando can win it, and they will discuss team orders internally. But Lando still has to earn those team orders. Like in Monza, he has to be the one to prove he is fast enough to deserve the second position ahead of Piastri. Because when you have a driver of Oscar's quality, he isn't going to accept being Lando's rear gunner. He might let Lando past if Lando is faster, but he sure as hell isn't going to be happy about hitting the brakes to let his teammate catch up. and if he isn't happy about how McLaren handle the situation, or if Mark Webber decides that the team aren't giving his driver a fair shot, and they decide that Oscar is better off elsewhere, then he will go elsewhere. They showed that to Alpine after they delayed promoting him. And if you want my opinion on all of this, not that this entire thing hasn't been one big opinion piece, but to summarize my opinion, I'm happy that Oscar is making it so hard for them. You know what made 2023 such a boring season? It was because Red Bull only had one, really good driver. They didn't have two drivers of remotely similar quality. 2019 and 20 were the same problem. Mercedes didn't have two drivers of the same quality. They only had one driver who would go off and win races. I don't want to watch Lando Norris winning by 20 seconds while Piastri backs up the rest of the pack the entire race behind him. I want to watch 20 guys going at each other, every single one of them desperate to get the race win. Team orders take something away from Formula 1. I understand why McLaren will now use them to favour Lando, but I'm so happy that Oscar is making it hard for them because it's incredible entertainment. But despite what I think is a pretty reasonable point of view to have, I bet there is a load of Lando Norris fans who are watching this and have already told me how wrong I am in the comments section, and as always, I can't wait to read why.